Right, so yesterday I did a video where I discussed some of the articles of the United Nations Charter, an international treaty agreement as it de facto is, in relation to finding a way around the United States consistently using its veto to block a ceasefire, and the findings are very interesting. It would seem there is certainly, on the face of it, routes that the UN could take, but the rub was that they might have to go through a court procedure first to decide if the ongoing US supply of arms to Israel meant the US should be abstaining on their ceasefire vote rather than using its veto as it has been. And that, of course, takes time. The people of Gaza do not have. Would be inordinately expensive in all likelihood as well, though for sure would be embarrassing to Biden, I would have thought. But it also relies on the UN being willing to go that far. However, perhaps a better route has now come to light in form of what's called Resolution 377 of the UN Charter, also called the Uniting for Peace Charter. This might just be the answer to Gaza's prayers. Or is it? Right, so see what you think of this. Resolution 377 of the UN Charter. What is this then, Damo? Well, to answer that question, see if any of this sounds familiar. We're going to go back to 1950. If I'd been alive myself back then, it would have been my birthday, in fact, 3rd of November 1950. The UN adopted Resolution 377, which became known as the Uniting for Peace Resolution. But why? Why did this thing, this legal structure, come into existence? Well, it came into being because of the actions of the then USSR, the Soviet Union, who at that time, being a permanent member of the UN Security Council, were blocking any determination by said council to protect the Republic of Korea, better known as South Korea to us, from military aggression being launched against it at that point by North Korea. A ceasefire was needed, folks, and one member of the Security Council was stopping it from happening. I did ask, did this sound familiar? Pretty much exactly what we're seeing the US doing right now on the Security Council in relation to Israel and Gaza. Now, initially the Security Council was able to get things done in this instance between the two Koreas. For example, they passed resolutions offering aid to South Korea to repel attacks in the name of establishing peace and security. But they only did that because the USSR was boycotting the meetings in the mistaken thinking that their absence, their abstention, would see such resolutions fall. Their mistake. But once they cottoned onto the fact they were wrong, though, they soon started turning up and using their veto, and so the same impasse befell the United Nations Security Council then in moving forwards as it faces now. Ironically, it was the United States who came up with the solution to the Security Council's Russian problem by saying that the United Nations itself should claim a subsidiary responsibility with regards to peace and security, as spelt out in Article 14 of the UN Charter, and the result of that was United Nations General Assembly Resolution 377. Article 14, for the record, simply states that the General Assembly may recommend measures for the peaceful adjustment of any situation, regardless of origin, which it deems likely to impair the general welfare or friendly relations amongst nations, including situations resulting from a violation of the provisions of the present Charter, setting forth the purposes and principles of the United Nations. So, think of Resolution 377 as kind of a standing order for the UN. Now, Resolution 377 is split up into 5 separate paragraphs, labelled A to E, but it is paragraph A of Resolution 377, therefore Resolution 377A in UN Charter parlance, which is how you might see this being presented a bit, as this idea is doing a little bit of floating around in certain areas of the social media. It's A, which is the important bit, and this is the so-called Uniting for Peace resolution, basically, and it just states that in any cases where the Security Council, because of a lack of unanimity amongst its 5 permanent members, P5, fails to act as required to maintain international security and peace, the General Assembly shall consider the matter immediately and may issue appropriate recommendations to UN members for collective measures, including the use of armed force when necessary, in order to maintain or restore international security and peace. Can you imagine it? The UN sending a task force into Gaza to repel Israel if they feel that would be necessary. They would be doing so opposing US and UK-made weaponry, both of them permanent Security Council members, at that. Oh, I'd hope it wouldn't come to that, but functionally the UN General Assembly, it would seem, could debate this matter to break the impasse, to restore peace now that the US is blocking, as the USSR did before. But it's not without difficulty. Both Articles 11 and 12 of the UN Charter explicitly state the Security Council has primary responsibility for matters involving international peace and security, and a resolution surely cannot supersede articles of the UN Charter. but politically it stinks to try and sideline the General Assembly of all UN nations in relation to a major conflict as well. So what we have is a throw-in of Resolution 377A, and you definitely do have an erosion of Articles and 11 and 12, though a weakening of them, but clearly a necessary one when permanent members of the Security Council insist on blocking progress towards a ceasefire. So it all becomes very, very political, very, very tricky, very, very messy. Still isn't straightforward. One way to make it more straightforward is for the Security Council itself, all of those members, to desire to bring the General Assembly in on this matter, which requires a unanimous vote amongst them. If the US and the UK are looking like international pariahs now for what they're doing, imagine them vetoing every other nation outside of the Security Council being allowed a say on this matter to try and resolve it. It'd be worth it just to see how they wrestle with that. But even if we got to that point, it doesn't mean a resolution is going to come any more quickly either. Since this resolution 377A, was passed in 1950, there have been 10 occasions that it's been come into use. The first time was in 1956 during the Suez Crisis, with war going on between Israel and Egypt, and also the British-French attack on the Suez Canal zone. At this point, Egypt having taken control of the canal, and the West really not liking that very much, even though, of course, the canal goes through Egypt. The latest one, though, shows that this resolution still may not actually resolve things. The latest triggering of the resolution came in 1997, and you won't believe why. Surprise, surprise, it came in to deal with the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territory. You'll note I used the present tense there, because believe it or not, this is still active to this day. 26 years on, this case is still not resolved. The case actually got adjourned in 2006, so it had been rumbling on actively for 9 years before it got adjourned, and it hasn't yet been reopened to finish dealing with it, though can be upon the request of any member state today. To be honest, this could be an opportunity then. This adjourned matter is directly related to what is happening today. It is a matter of Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territory. What is happening here and now in Gaza, and because it is still active, would not need the Security Council to reopen it. They did all this already. It's still in session from before. If all it requires is for one member state to reopen the established case, then why not do so? Even if they do, though, given this particular issue has gone on for years already, went on for 9 years before adjournment, it doesn't appear that a quick solution is likely to present itself here either, though. It might be quicker for the UN to look at legal actions for the US exerting influence on both sides with the UN and with Israel, especially in light of Secretary of State Antony Blinken fast-tracking military aid to Israel and bypassing congressional checks and balances on that on the basis that he claims it is an emergency. Apparently people can't die fast enough in Gaza. That's how that comes across, and that plunges the Biden administration into even more depths of disgust with people around the world. I'm not going to get into that matter here, though. Shifting responsibility to the General Assembly might, in light of the atrocities we're bearing witness to here and now, the ethnic cleansing happening, spur them into some action. It's certainly worth a try. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. Put more content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where, with Israel calling the UN anti-Semitic for daring to try and bring in a ceasefire, for daring to call out what they're doing, but with me, I'd want to redouble my efforts in putting them in their place. Therefore, they cannot be treated differently to any other nation, and how dare they invoke racism as an excuse for it. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Keir Starmer's trip to Scotland got off to the start the charlatan deserved, didn't it? After his little Thatcher moment, his love-in regarding her when he was chasing Tory votes in the Tory graph. But up in Scotland, it clearly all seems to be about whose vote he's after. Scotland greeted him as he deserved, though, didn't it, following that article? Facing direct questions from the public shouldn't scare you. Shouldn't if you're a politician and want to lead people and lead the country, but terrify Starmer it definitely did. From questions on a train from another passenger, seeing his heavies bundle the guy away, to the heavies bundling Starmer himself through a Glasgow train station, to his heavies barging through protesters with a Range Rover, it seemed. It speaks volumes for the politics of the man that this is how ordinary people react to his presence, how he reacts to the presence of ordinary people in his near vicinity, and his weather-vane brand of politics. I'd like to think it shocked him, but it hasn't changed his ways, as of course he brought to Scotland something he never leaves home without, didn't he? And that is both of his two faces. Starmer headed to Scotland on the back of praising Margaret Thatcher and got a reception he deserved. Thatcher is hated for what she did to Scotland, whether it is just for their benefit and their votes, though, or a desire to get out of Scotland again without more confrontation. Starmer all of a sudden started hating on Thatcher once he was there. You simply cannot believe anything this man says or does. Right, so here's the thing I don't fathom with Keir Starmer. Saying one thing to one lot of people to win their votes and saying the total opposite to another to win their votes. Does he think nobody on either side notices? Why does he think he can get away with lying like he does, so blatantly, so publicly, in this era of social media where nothing is missed or overlooked, and leave people with no idea at the end of the day what he does actually stand for? I can't wait for the next Labour manifesto to come out. People will start taking bets on how much of it will either get binned or get denied or contradicted by Starmer during the election campaign. Because who could possibly believe any of it anyway, when this man flip-flops on literally everything and anything? He has no hard and fast position on a damn thing, it seems, unless it's something delivering money to Labour Party coffers, such as the Israel lobby. So many of his donors connected with that, and he, of course, that Zionist without qualification. But Scotland is what this video is about, and Starmer wants more switching faces to address the people there with more of his lies, more of his promises that he won't keep, and in order to pretend that he's on their side, and that very much started by flipping on his adoration of Thatcher the milk snatcher, despite having gone to the Tory graph, behind a paywall at that, and talking about the meaningful change she had brought and unlocking the UK's natural entrepreneurism, extolling what he reckons passed for her virtues. Newsflash, sunshine, she had none. This week, however, it wasn't Tory voters he was wooing. There aren't that many in Scotland at the end of the day, so he changed tack and changed face. He was speaking to Scottish Labour members at a gala dinner, so preaching to the converted, not one for the ordinary folk, yet still he was asked if he was a Thatcher fan, to which now he said, "No, absolutely not. She did terrible things, particularly here in Scotland, which everybody in this room, myself included, profoundly disagrees with. The point I was trying to make in a piece that we penned last week is that there are some political leaders who have a mission, a plan, that they implement. And Attlee, of course, was one of them, the New Jerusalem. Thatcher, whether you liked her or didn't like her, you couldn't say she didn't have a plan or a mission. Her plans, her missions, they were to destroy communities. Mass unemployment should be her enduring legacy, and will be for many whose families were touched by it, not exclusively in Scotland either, my own very much included in that. The mass privatisation of all manner of public sectors and services, and the high bills we are living with today for all of our basic utilities. That's her legacy. The destruction of the UK manufacturing base. That's her legacy. The poll tax, of course, that eventually finished her. That's her legacy. Millions of kids who grew up in hardship then, generation after generation struggling since, as no successive government since her has changed a damn thing. That's her legacy. Anyone showing the slightest bit of adoration or affection for that rancid woman whose damage to the UK and to the lives of ordinary working class people the country over is a wrong 'un who should be avoided like the plague. Starmer's comment there won't have come as comfort to anyone in attendance listening and who has a passing knowledge of Starmer's style of leadership, which basically consists of purging anyone who dares challenge him, taking every populist stance that ever crops up, flipping on it the moment it becomes politically expedient to do so, while supporting the Tories either by voting with them or sitting on his hands and not opposing at all. If he's talking of Thatcher in positive terms as having a plan or a mission, he's very much highlighting the fact he has neither, no matter how many plans or missions he himself announces. Each time he relaunched his leadership, unable to get people to like him and binning pledge after promise after vow after mission in the process. He published a bit of video from that dinner, one quote of which that he said caught my eye. He said, "We've changed the Labour Party across the UK and we have changed Scottish Labour, and what you now see is a Labour Party that is fundamentally different to the Labour Party that fought the last general election. Unrecognisably different, and very obviously pro-business." You've changed the fundamentals, all right. You're no longer permitted to be a socialist in a democratic socialist party. You're pro-Tory, you're pro-Thatcher, and you'll continue to be held to account for what you said. To flip on that, depending on who you are speaking to, just makes you a fundamentally dishonest person who cannot be trusted, and I'll not be giving my vote to such a blatantly dishonest politician, one of the most dishonest I've ever known. A party that is fundamentally different from the one which fought the last election. Well, to coin your exaltation of Thatcher, whatever you thought of Jeremy Corbyn, at least you knew he meant what he said. Nobody ever doubted the man's honesty, whether you liked him or not. If Labour has changed fundamentally in one issue more than any other, it's that it is now more dishonest now than it ever has been before. Led by a liar, led by someone whose sole obsession is power, and who will do or say whatever he thinks it takes to get him to number 10. Right up to polling day, I don't expect most people, manifesto or no manifesto, from Labour come the general election, to have a clue as to what a Starmer-led government would actually do in power. Because whatever they say or do, you just can't trust it. On that, Starmer is exactly like Thatcher, like any other Tory. That should be the message to every Scot who's endured listening to what this dreadful man has had to say to them, when he's not been running away from you as fast as possible in case you try to ask him a question. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation. It's got to be Starmer's arrival in Scotland if you haven't seen it already. He was terrified. The thought of engaging with the actual public petrifies him. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so for all of Israel's claims to be targeting Hamas, they are taking out an awful lot of civilian infrastructure, not to mention civilians in the process. And that very much includes medical aid, infrastructure and personnel. I covered the attack on a Médecins Sans Frontières convoy in a recent video, but that I've since discovered was just scratching the surface. You have to bear in mind here that Israel has access to the most cutting-edge state-of-the-art weaponry and technology on the planet. Other nations cannot sell it to them fast enough because they're always in the market and are more than capable of making actual surgical strikes rather than what they are saying are surgical. They've proven in the past to be able to take out an apartment floor whilst leaving all the rest of the building untouched, for example. So what they've been doing for weeks now is not surgical at all, but it amounts to blatantly levelling Gaza, starting from the north and working their way southwards, driving people south as they do so. Ethnically cleansing the region, we can only assume. It seems obvious. So Israel can take the land, lock, stock and barrel. Why else would they be carrying on the way they are? This disproportionate response to what happened on October 7th. But it's the medical facilities and their staff being targeted I want to draw the attention to in this video, because the sheer scale of what Israel has been doing, just on that, a war crime as it specifically is, done under the nonsense excuse of fighting Hamas, despite all of Israel's lies about tunnels and weapons caches being behind MRI machines being completely debunked. A press conference by Dr. Ben Thompson of North American Medical Doctors spelled out exactly what has been happening in Gaza at Israeli hands. How is any of this, in what he says, fighting Hamas? Right, so a press conference was called the other day by North America Medical Doctors representative Dr. Ben Thompson. North America Medical Doctors are one agency of humanitarian medical aid working under the umbrella aid agency Union of Medical Relief and Care Organisations, the UOSSM. His statement was so good, so clear, so bluntly hard-hitting, I defy anyone to argue with what he says, with the statistics he came out with. The situation from the medical aid perspective in Gaza, in and of itself, is absolutely dire and being deliberately taken out. There can be no question of that, based on the fact after fact that he delivered in his speech. He said, "We are reaching the point of no return, where blatant disregard for international humanitarian law scars our collective consciousness. As of this morning, 283 healthcare workers in Gaza have been killed. The last 2 months has been the deadliest conflict in United Nations history, with 133 of their staff members killed. There have been 212 attacks on Gaza healthcare facilities since October the 7th. This includes 24 different hospitals that have been bombed by Israel. Over 100 ambulances that have been put out of service. Israel has arrested dozens of doctors. Their whereabouts remain unknown. The head of the main hospital, Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, Mohammed Abu Salmiya, has been under Israeli arrest since November 22nd. Many other senior doctors have continued to be held by the Israeli military for almost 2 weeks, with no charges, and no one knows their whereabouts. Rantizi Pediatric Subspecialty Hospital, bombed. Al-Nasser Pediatric Hospital, bombed. Gaza's only eye hospital, bombed. Gaza's only mental health hospital, bombed. Wafa Rehabilitation Hospital, bombed. The senior facility immediately adjacent to Wafa Rehabilitation Hospital, bombed. Al-Jura Children's Hospital, targeted with prohibited white phosphorus on October the 12th. Indonesian hospital, the only hospital currently operating in the north, still trying to treat patients while being bombed. Shifa Hospital, bombed. The two medical schools in Gaza, the Islamic University of Gaza, bombed, and Al-Azhar University Medical School, bombed. Médecins Sans Frontières ambulance convoy, bombed. Red Cross ambulance convoys, bombed. Of 35 hospitals in Gaza as of this morning, 26 are non-functional. 9 remain only partially functional, but they are operating at more than double their capacity with critical shortages of basic supplies and fuel. These facilities are also providing shelter to thousands of internally displaced people. Palestine Red Crescent Society yesterday announced that operations of their ambulances in northern Gaza has stopped due to depletion of fuel, hospital closures. It is now impossible to evacuate wounded people in the north. Instead, those patients are left to die. As of this morning, over 17,000 Palestinian people have been killed, including over 7,000 children. There are at least 46,000 people injured, thousands of whom are critically injured. There is insufficient hospital space to treat even a fraction of these patients. Massively overcrowded United Nations shelters have become havens to spread infectious diseases, including a hepatitis A outbreak, multiple meningitis outbreaks, lice, skin infections, and multiple diarrheal illness outbreaks. The United Nations Human Rights Office has declared on December the 5th the pattern of attacks that target civilian infrastructure raises serious concerns about Israel's compliance with international humanitarian law and raises the risk of atrocity crimes. There have been immeasurable numbers of violations of special protection to civilians, children and medical personnel, and widespread violations of international humanitarian law. I'm really not sure how much more bluntly and clearly obvious it is that Israel's actions in response to the October 7th Hamas attack and the deaths that led to in Israel, evidence pointing to many, if not most of those deaths actually being at Israeli hands under so-called Hannibal directives, has not been about targeting Hamas, but wiping out the ability for anyone to survive and live in Gaza. It is a war crime to target civilians deliberately, yet by blocking medical staff from doing their jobs and clearly targeting their facilities as well in order to help civilians, this is clearly what is happening. Nobody is safe anywhere. 283 medical workers killed, more arrested for doing what exactly? The crime of saving lives? It is a war crime to target medical staff. It is a war crime to target journalists. A much more widely publicised story of Israeli atrocity that's come out, and the attacks and the numbers of journalists that have killed. More journalists having been killed in Gaza since October the 7th than in any other conflict ever, including both world wars. Israel appeared to be deliberately targeting those reporting what is happening and those trying to save lives. Sickeningly, the only entity being afforded protection seems to be Israel itself, thanks to the UN permanently having its hands tied over this matter, the US vetoing a stop to Israel carrying on doing what it is doing, and now having put into law, symbolic as it is, that anti-Zionism is now anti-Semitic, which will endanger the lives of the great many anti-Zionist Jews living in America. It is an absurd equation to make. It is not true, and it ties the hands of anyone trying to hold Israel to account for what it is actually doing. The International Criminal Court in The Hague is apparently now investigating Israel over these breaches of humanitarian law. Israel has been reported to them by Turkey, which has triggered an absurd response from Benjamin Netanyahu, who has taken to video, calling such an action anti-Semitic, because of course he has. Accusing the court of now being racist, it is what Israel do every time, but is also not true, and we all need to have the courage to call out this weaponization of anti-Semitism when we see it, because if we don't, not only does it make it harder to fight the real thing, the societal evil that it is, but it also makes it harder to deal with Israel and help those in Palestine who are right now the victims of genocide. That said, faith in the ICC seems to have issues surrounding its chief prosecutor being a bit toothless on this matter, but that's going to have to wait for another video. There is not one fully functional hospital left in the whole of Gaza. You cannot say that that isn't deliberate. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below, be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where I cover the details of that Médecins Sans Frontières medical convoy bombing. This is just one story amongst so many, so very similar. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Germany are having a little bit of a hold my beer moment with the US, following on from news that has come out in America this week, it seems. There's been a bit of coverage in the news over the last few days over the US having passed a resolution that being anti-Zionist is now anti-Semitic. This isn't true. It never will be true. Put it into law, or symbolic resolution as it is, just makes it a poor resolution, not a matter of fact. But what will now be a fact is that Jewish people who are anti-Zionist, or anyone who is anti-Zionist, will now themselves face being called themselves anti-Semites, calling Jewish people anti-Semitic themselves. That will be because by virtue of this law being enacted, they will then be labelled self-hating Jews and punished for it. And that really is anti-Semitic. This is absolutely nuts. A harmful false equivalence, and I figured I'd be doing a video very much on how harmful, senseless and ill-educated this is by the nation showing itself to be Benjamin Netanyahu's biggest backers right now. And then it came to my notice what was happening and going on very much underreported in Europe, with Germany now, it seems, considering making German citizenship incumbent on showing loyalty to Israel. Right, so it's a global race to who can show the most sycophancy to the occupying state of Israel right now, with the focus being on what has happened in the United States in our media. It's not being widely covered, massively covered, but it is being covered in a few places. But no way can it be ignored what Germany is doing here either, despite this story being completely overlooked. Stateside, a Republican Party resolution in the House of Representatives to equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism passed by 311 votes to just 14, showing an awfully large number of Democrats joined in with them, many abstained. But when you live in a country where the two main parties are both right-wing, you often don't see a fig leaf between them. Look at that, and look at now at Starmer and Sunak. It's literally our future here. Now, this resolution was only symbolic. It was a sign of American attitudes towards Israel, as if we didn't know already. But when the resolution also specifically raised the slogan, "From the river to the sea," and it passed with that slogan being specifically described as a rallying cry for the eradication of the state of Israel and the Jewish people, you can see how big of a problem it is, not least for Jewish people who happen to be anti-Zionists themselves, of which there are many. This sets an absolutely horrendous precedent, since it's a step towards criminalising standing up for the rights of Palestinians if by doing so it can be framed in any way as being anti-Zionist or critical of Israel. You can't criticise Israel if you're supporting Palestinian liberation, basically. It places an entire state above critique. And when that is one of the most dangerous, barbaric apartheid states on the planet, that should be facing embargoes for its decades of occupation and its ongoing genocide now in Gaza, its settler colonialism, boycott, divestment, sanctions, is instead facing strengthened protections, along of course with the US doing a sterling business in the arms trade with them right now. It is not racist to oppose occupation and colonialism and genocide. It's the right under international law of the occupied peoples definitely to do that. Supporting them in that therefore cannot be racist either. All US politicians in the House of Representatives have shown is how deeply they are invested in Israel to the detriment of Palestinians, and they look like global idiots for it. But Germany is what this video is supposed to be about. So let's get on with that and what they're doing, because where you may have heard a thing or two about that US resolution, I guarantee you've heard nothing about this because our press haven't touched it. This has come out on the website of German broadcaster Deutsche Welle. At the moment, I bet I've said that wrong completely, but at the moment this has not become law across all of Germany, but it is now law in the eastern province of Saxony-Anhalt. And that is that anyone applying for German citizenship in Saxony-Anhalt must now declare their support for Israel's right to exist. Now, my initial thought when I heard this talk of Israel's right to exist is, well, what about every other country that has ever existed that no longer does? What happened to their right to existence? Abyssinia, Persia, Prussia, Czechoslovakia, Kampuchea, Dahomey, Yugoslavia, Ceylon, Texas, the USSR, Rhodesia, the Federation of Southern Arabia, the Tuvan People's Republic even, and more, and on and on and on it goes, because there are hundreds of them. Why is Israel different? Why is that one's existence more important than any other that came before it? It's really arrogant, not to mention senseless, when there is so much turmoil over occupied territory, Israel occupying the entirety of Palestine and a good chunk of Syria as well. Nonetheless, effective immediately, those applying for German citizenship in that one German state must declare their support for Israel's right to exist. This commitment is part of new language that State Interior Minister Tamara Zishang informed relevant authorities about in a ministerial decree this week. Failing to do so would deny naturalisation to foreigners who otherwise would fulfil the necessary conditions for obtaining German nationality. Under the new guidelines, applicants would have to sign a declaration that they recognise Israel's right to exist and condemn any efforts directed against the existence of the State of Israel. A more thorough check of anti-Semitic attitudes would also be a part of the naturalisation process, of course. Now, what this boils down to fundamentally in Germany is between naturalisation law and what they call reason of state, what amounts to a legislated national interest. But as you can imagine, when strength of legalities, when it comes to something like that, which can only ever be based in opinion, well, that's going to be a little bit ropey, isn't it? Naturalisation law, citizenship law basically, is made at the federal level in the German Bundestag. But how each of the 16 German states chooses to implement that is up to them, hence this move in Saxony-Anhalt. However, the Bundestag is considering a similar Israel clause, which if introduced at that federal level, would apply to the whole of Germany in every state. And it would then be up to those 16 states and how they implemented that. Certainly that goes a lot further than the US resolution, which is only symbolic, because in Germany, in one state at least, and possibly coming nationwide soon, this is now law. From the State Interior Minister's perspective, citizenship, by adding on the clause about Israel, represents a further upholding on rights of human dignity and religious freedom, as well as the exclusion of Jew hatred and anti-Semitic attitudes. And I guess from the German perspective, given their history, you can understand them wanting to underline that never do they ever want the offence of before, the Holocaust and so on and so forth, to be repeated in their name again. But of course, holding Israel up doing what it is doing now, I think risks undermining their thinking. It also doesn't represent all Jews, again, which this risks muddying the waters on. So many Jews worldwide are disgusted with Israel, bound to be a great many of them in Germany too, and do not want to associate themselves with it and are calling them out. Would Germany, in which case, turn away Jewish people who will not swear to accept Israel's right to exist when they seem determined to deny Palestinians their right to exist? You see, the issue becomes decidedly problematic, doesn't it? Further problems stem from that reason of state law as well, which the State Interior Minister has also grounded her decision in. This really is arbitrary stuff. Even by German legal positioning, it is only ever considered quasi-legal, because it's based on opinion, it's not based in fact. What one person thinks is best for Germany may not be what their successor ends up thinking. It isn't a democratic construct at all. And as a result of that, is a very difficult thing to enforce and is open to challenge all the time. And you can imagine on something as contentious as this, it would be challenged. What we have here functionally is a state acting out of kilter with its people too, as is the case with so many countries, our own included, being let down by our leaders. According to polling by a research institute called Allensbach, only a third of Germans believe they have a historical responsibility for Israel. As far as destroying Hamas goes, 35% of Germans agree with Israel doing that. However, 38% want Israel to show restraint instead. Well, agreeing with the 35% over the 38% might be the difference between getting German citizenship before much longer, and that to me seemed absolutely mad. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where, as much as this German media outlet calls into question what Germany is doing, sadly we can't say the same for the BBC here, can we? As some of their headlines have been absolutely beyond belief. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so the moral vacuum that is former Labour MP and career Israel lobbyist Joan Ryan has popped up again, announcing her brand new role, which has to be heard to be believed because it's utterly bonkers, which is very much the same as her entire parliamentary career, in fact, which largely consisted of advocating for Israel seemingly full-time in any way she possibly could. Though it's a strange time to be announcing this when the public opinion of Israel is so low, and when it's so easy for someone in alternative media like, well, I don't know, say me, to come along and go, oh, is this what Joan Ryan's doing today, is it? Well, it would be a rotten shame if I told everyone what she got up to in the past then, wouldn't it? And how deranged her announcement about her new job, on video no less, actually sounds. Because it isn't just about trying to extol the virtues of her new job, the organisation she's now working for, but she had to drag Jeremy Corbyn into the equation as well. She couldn't resist it, slandering him even, repeating the scam of how much of an anti-Semite he was when he was no such thing, and rather than pay any heed, let alone money, to this grifter for an apartheid state, she needs to be told where to go and be consigned to the dumpster of history. Right, so Joan Ryan, let's refresh some memories for some people and introduce her to others who might not know who she is, because she is a proper piece of work. She's the former Labour MP for Enfield North, which she held the seat for from 1997 to 2019, barring one occurrence of losing her seat in 2010. She lost her seat incidentally following an expenses scandal involving flipping her constituency home in Enfield for a main home in South London after using expenses to do up the constituency property, and also the year before that conspiring against then PM Gordon Brown, seemingly with leadership intentions herself, which got her sacked from her then party roles. Despite losing in 2010, she stood again for 2015 to the disgust of the local Enfield North Labour Party, who hadn't forgotten about the expenses issue, but she got in, got selected anyway, and got re-elected and became chair of Labour Friends of Israel shortly afterwards, which of course speaks volumes for her Israeli sensitivities and proclivities in and of itself. It's worth noting that, like so many others involved in that group and in Israel advocacy and lobbying, she isn't Jewish either. Scandal followed her shortly afterwards, though, when in 2017 she got caught on film, apparently appearing to accept bribes for supporting the bringing down of certain MPs it was felt were not helping the Israeli cause, in the Al Jazeera documentary The Lobby, which was collated through use of undercover footage, body cams and the like, to investigate the influence of the Israel lobby on British politics and its politicians. And Joan Ryan, well, she was the star of the show, really, seen discussing the bringing down of MPs with a then Israeli embassy official called Shai Massot, and a £1 million pot of approved Israeli government funding to bring UK lawmakers on junkets to Israel as a bit of a sweetener. This was used by her CLP to try and deselect her ahead of the 2019 general election. She quit the Labour Party in February of 2019 over this in reality, but publicly she chose to blame Jeremy Corbyn for it, of course, claiming he was demonising and delegitimising Israel. Her resignation statement included mention that Corbyn was responsible for a culture of anti-Jewish racism and hatred for Israel, and a government led by him would be an existential threat to the Jewish community. Really was quite the piece of work. That she's now gone to work for a pro-Israel group and has put out a video grifting for funds and attacking Corbyn yet again, then really shouldn't surprise very many people. She's carrying on with what she's always done. And if anything has got worse, because her video bragging about her new job is just unhinged. She said, "It's almost 4 years now since I left the Labour Party. I left in protest at the virus of anti-Semitism that was being allowed to infect the Labour Party, to destroy the Labour Party. And the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, would do nothing about it, would take no action. If anything, he was a perpetrator. I'm proud of the action I took in its highlighting to the British public the toxicity of this kind of politics of hate and the damage it does to our democracy and to our communities. I've never regretted my action. We learnt some tough lessons, not least of which is that you can't fight anti-Semitism unless you also fight anti-Zionism. And that anti-Zionism is just the latest iteration in that centuries-old hatred. Standing up to anti-Zionism and building and strengthening relations between Europe and Israel, between the UK and Israel, is crucial. And I'm very proud now to be the first executive director of Elnet UK, and we work to strengthen that relationship. Resigning from the Labour Party and standing up to anti-Semitism, that's my legacy. And by supporting the Elnet Legacy Fund, you can ensure the future of Elnet's mission to strengthen bilateral relations between Israel and Europe. It's crucial work. We could not do what we do without your support, without your commitment. So thank you. Thank you for all that you do." Well, Don't thank me too fast, Joan. You aren't going to like what I have to say about this. Corbyn bashing, grifting, shilling for Israel, and didn't even have the decency to once acknowledge the hell that Israel are inflicting on Palestine right now while asking you for your money. She's a one-person tyre fire of bigoted idiocy. You left the Labour Party under a cloud. Your own CLP couldn't stand you. You clearly still think bashing Corbyn is a winner. It isn't. The scam has well and truly been blown open. The cost of what we lost being measured in every failure and every lie that comes out of Keir Starmer's mouth and his regime that replaced it, far from for the better. That you call Corbyn a perpetrator of anti-Semitism has me on one hand asking, what did he say himself that was directly anti-Semitic then? Go on, Joan, answer me. And for two, is clearly slander. But if you really need a lesson on what Corbyn has done to fight anti-Semitism, how about that time before he became an MP when he stopped then Islington Council leader Margaret Hodge from levelling a Jewish cemetery for development? Or that time he organised a counter-demonstration to the neo-Nazi march through Wood Green? Or when he led commemorations on the anniversary of the Battle of Cable Street one year? Or him challenging David Cameron at PMQs to do more on anti-Semitism? Here's a list of 50 examples, Joan, of Jeremy Corbyn opposing anti-Semitism. 50. Have a read. Here's another 10 examples of what he did in Labour to combat and deal with anti-Semitism, as commented on directly by the EHRC themselves, which clearly you must have missed too, or you just willfully ignored. Now she's selling us the vision that criticising Israel is racist in and of itself, just as the US have symbolically passed a resolution in the House of Representatives over this. How many Jewish people will have been incensed by you, the non-Jewish sellout, in your words here? I'm not Jewish and I'm incensed. You cannot have a state placed above criticism, especially given the atrocities it is committing right now, ethnic cleansing of Gaza. But of course you can. You're now being paid too. Elnet UK, I thought they made hairspray. But it's not that Elnet, obviously. This one is all about, as Ryan said, strengthening ties between Europe and Israel, which is the opposite that should be happening right now. Europe should be placing embargoes on Israel until it stops trying to flatten Gaza entirely, stops breaking international law, and starts being held to account for that. Joan Ryan, by what she said in her video, by being the head honcho for this organisation in the UK now, shows what it is really all about. It is Labour Friends of Israel PLC, isn't it? Complete with more weaponisation of anti-Semitism, as if we don't already still see enough of that. From MPs advocating for the lobby to all manner of groups already in existence doing it, like the Board of Deputies, to the Jewish Labour Network, to the Jewish Labour Movement, to the Community Security Trust and more. Fundamentally, though, what I get from this story is that Joan Ryan is the sort of person who takes a job from committers of genocide to rescue their image and not challenge them. That's the sort of person she is. That's the sort of MP she was as well. If I was looking for an advocate to rescue my image, she'd be the last person I went to. But I don't suppose Israel these days, given what they're doing in Gaza, have quite as many options as they used to these days. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation with the national treasure and very definitely Jewish author Michael Rosen has long been a Corbyn supporter and has suffered the same attacks over anti-Semitism that many of the rest of us have, Jew and non-Jew alike. But this was still happening to him as recently as last August, accused of having driven a man to his death even. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so it might not be news to many right now that oil and gas, mostly gas, has been found off the Gazan coastline, and speculation that this might be what the genocide is really all about, or at least this might be the actual interests that foreign states have in the area, even though we all know we need to move away from fossil fuels. Well, adding fuel to the fire on this speculation has been news that even before the blood of the Gazan people is dry, Israel have been issuing drilling licenses to access these reserves, even though this is occupied territory. They have no right to be doing this, let alone any oil and gas corporations wanting to get involved in what is quite clearly disputed territory. Well, BP have gotten involved, one of 6 companies to accept a share of 12 illegally issued gas exploration licenses and more, sweeping in on the wreckage of Israeli atrocity to make a profit. And people, some people certainly, weren't going to accept that. Right, so the oil and gas industry champing at the bit to get it into Gaza. It's not completely new news here, is it? We know that there's oil and gas to be found there. We know that BP and the like have wanted to get access to these gas reserves off the coast of Gaza. And we know that Rishi Sunak is very supportive of this. You see, Infosys have a substantial IT contract with BP, so the better BP does, the better Infosys does. Therefore, the bigger the payouts from Infosys to Sunak's wife, for whom Infosys is, of course, the family firm. There never seems to be anything in Sunak's actions that don't result in more money being made for himself. But this isn't about him directly. He's got enough on his plate for getting the answer to everything the COVID inquiry is apparently asking him, and a big vote tonight on his Rwanda deal, which it looks like he might lose, and possibly his job as PM with it. But that hasn't happened yet, so let's get back to the here and now. For now, Israel have issued exploratory drilling licenses, 12 of them, between 6 different drilling firms, one of which is BP. Well, why are you picking on BP specifically then, Damo? Well, they might be getting a little bit extra into the bargain, you see. Their greed, their cooperation with Israel goes a little bit further. You see, not only are they getting drilling licenses, access to these Gazan gas fields, they are also acquiring a 50% stake in NewMed, which is an Israeli drilling company, also being granted a license itself, incidentally. But they are owned by the Dalek Group. They're a subsidiary of this conglomerate called the Dalek Group. Nothing quite makes Israel sound more villainous than literally having a company named after a Doctor Who enemy, does it? But actually the company came first in the 1950s, so perhaps it was the other way around. At any rate, the Dalek Group is on a UN blacklist of companies complicit in illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank. So why on earth would BP want to take half of a company owned by a blacklisted colonial settler insisting conglomerate? Do they want to be tainted by that too? Got to be worth it for them, hasn't it, really? Well, by acquiring half of NewMed, BP then get access to the 45% stake that NewMed has in Leviathan, which is the name of the largest natural gas field in the Mediterranean, situated just off the Israeli coast. So you have BP granted a license to explore natural gas opportunities illegally off the coast of Gaza. These were granted before the events of the 7th of October, incidentally, so who says this genocide isn't also about oil and gas? And by getting access to the more northern Leviathan gas field off the Israel coast, can really gain a foothold in the area. And even if the exploratory drilling off Gaza comes to nothing, either by not finding anything, which seems unlikely given the height, or more likely gets deemed illegal and they're stopped somehow from doing it, but that requires enforcement to actually mean anything, they would still have Leviathan access to make things worthwhile for them. What they are doing is completely immoral, given Israel have prevented Gaza accessing this resource which belongs to them. Yet another violation of international law, by the way. But it all seems like win-win for BP here. Well, not everyone was going to take this on the chin. Least of all protest group Fossil Free London, who rocked up to BP's headquarters and blockaded it last week. Out came the banners and the placards with messages reading, "Stop fueling genocide," or "Profits from oil but none from aid. Gazan genocide is British made." I quite like that. Clearly linking the oil and gas company's dirty deal with ongoing genocide in Gaza. And you can't argue that point when they would be going in to explore an area they have no right to do so in, occupied territory as it is. The permissions, the licenses should be worthless, given those issuing them have no right to be doing so. Now, Fossil Free London, they don't exactly get the promotion in the press, I suppose, of other groups like Just Stop Oil, who are a fair bit bigger, but they aren't dissimilar in their aims. Fossil Free London on their website describe themselves as, "We exist to make London inhospitable to the fossil fuel industry. Oil giants like Shell and BP and the banks like Barclays that fund them are setting our house on fire. Their fossil fuel expansion is fueling climate collapse. They make mega profits from our unpayable energy bills. They lobby and greenwash to thwart climate action, and many of them call London home. As our politicians fail to act, we must take on these industries and organise for climate justice." And they do just that, using direct action, creative stunts, disruption and protest to tarnish the industry and attack its social licence, in their words. They were recently in action protesting outside of another oil and gas operator, Ithaca Energy, at the beginning of November, who are based in the North Sea, as far as their drilling operations are concerned anyway. Yet Fossil Free London protested them for also enabling genocide in Palestine, because just like NewMed, Ithaca Energy is also a subsidiary of the Dalek Group. More cash for Israel, especially when you think that in the North Sea, Ithaca own the Cambo oil field and part owns that newly opened, thanks to Sunak, Rosebank oil. All of this furthering, thanks to Dalek Group's connection, more settler investment in the West Bank. A statement from Fossil Free London said, It comes as no surprise that big oil is now sweeping in upon the wreckage, using this humanitarian crisis to dredge out profits from more oil and gas, just as they are doing in this global humanitarian crisis of climate collapse. Whilst we are all justifiably distracted and our attention taken up by the nation-on-nation attacks and the humanitarian catastrophe and the fight to see something get done about that, big business is doing what it does so often, so amorally, whilst our attention is focused elsewhere and looks for where a profit can be turned whilst nobody's looking at them. In BP's case, not even genocide, it seems, precludes them from seeing this as an opportunity. If they go forward with this, they should absolutely be blacklisted alongside Dalek Group for their role here, not just by the UN, but by all of us too. We can all pick another pump to fill up at, can't we? Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where if you think you can't have an effect by protesting in your own small way, individuals or ordinary people from across the country just last week managed to shut down 4 arms supply factories to Israel in disgust at the UK's part in this genocide. So we can, and we do have an effect, and we can repeat it as often and for as long as necessary, and you can be part of that as well. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so last night the United Nations General Assembly met and voted in favour of a ceasefire in Gaza, and Israel was anything but happy about this. A 2/3 majority was required for the resolution to pass, and they certainly got it, with 153 countries voting in favour of a ceasefire, 10 voting against it and 23 abstentions. So they smashed it. Alas, it is only advisory. It is not legally binding. It does, however, heap more pressure on the US, who are the ones with all the power to end all of this, yet who instead insist on supporting Israel and continuing with what they're doing. Though that said, they're clearly feeling the heat from the rest of the world right now with their statement following the vote, placing the most distance between themselves and Israel that we've yet seen. But that doesn't equal a withdrawal of support, nor has it seen any contrition by Israel at all, as their UN representative Gilad Erdan, well, he went off on one. Right, so I covered the possibility of Resolution 377A, the Uniting for Peace resolution, being triggered the other day, and I also noted that they could do this avoiding the need for a unanimous vote from the UN Security Council in order to do that, if they reopened the 10th emergency special session the last time Resolution 37A was triggered, back in 1997, which had been in adjournment since 2006 and was therefore still a live session. Well, as it turned out, this is exactly what ended up happening. Any member state could choose to reopen that case in light of what is happening now, since that session had been originally opened to discuss the Israeli occupation of the occupied Palestinian territories. So it is all extremely relevant and related to what is happening here and now, as much as it did in 2006 or in 1997 when it actually began. Any member state could choose to do that at any time. That the UN has been sitting on this since 2006, though, does show how slowly they do tend to move and how seriously they've been taking this illegal occupation up until now. But the session was reopened upon the joint request of Egypt and Mauritania following the triggering of Article 99 by UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, which in and of itself, still advisory, but was an escalation of the seriousness of which he viewed the ongoing genocide we're all still bearing witness to, and meant that the UN Security Council once more had to convene and try to pass a ceasefire. The Security Council being the body that can pass a resolution that is legally binding. Of course, we know the US yet again used their veto to kill off that chance of a ceasefire. Therefore, we came to Resolution 377A. That came into focus, how that could be instigated, and it was Egypt and Mauritania that did that on the 11th of December, and therefore the General Assembly met to debate the matter and vote on it the following day, last night at time of writing. Ahead of the vote, though, Israeli Representative Gilad Erdan, a man who has made a complete prat of himself already over this matter of what's been going on between Israel and Gaza, back in October, towards the end of October, when the ongoing current conflict had been underway for a couple of weeks, when he turned up to the Security Council wearing a yellow Star of David and demanding that condemnation of Hamas whilst they were debating a humanitarian pause, and said he'd keep wearing that symbol until the Security Council condemned Hamas. Basically, by what he was doing, his actions by wearing this symbol, directly comparing Hamas to the Nazis, it would appear, which Well, I'm not going to get into that, but suffice to say a few people would right now, looking at the situation in Gaza, consider the boot to be on the other foot. But ahead of this vote, Erdogan said that the General Assembly finds itself about to vote on another hypocritical resolution. He said, "Not only does this resolution fail to condemn Hamas for crimes against humanity, it does not mention Hamas at all. This will only prolong the death and destruction in the region. That is precisely what a ceasefire means." He also asked the question of the UN representatives assembled in light of Hamas's reason for existence, in his view, to be to destroy Israel and declare it would repeat its atrocities again and again. Why would anyone want to aid Hamas in continuing their rule of terror and actualising their satanic agenda? Here's the thing. If he's right, surely we would have seen attacks by Hamas on Israel since October 7th. We haven't seen any, though, have we? All the fighting since October 8th to date has been by Israel against Hamas in Gaza. Hamas have been condemned for what they did, rightfully. Violence is never the right way. It never works. All peace is achieved through talks, and that requires a ceasefire. You can argue that their actions brought focus back onto this situation where it was being previously ignored, but it shouldn't be the answer. It shouldn't be where we aspire to. We had a brief week-long ceasefire, though, not that long ago. It was not broken by Hamas. It was, however, repeatedly broken by Israel. I would also raise the point that if Israel fears so much for its own existence, trying to eradicate Palestine from existence, its far-right government of Netanyahu, who did a deal with extremists for power who don't accept Palestine exists or has that same right to exist as Israel does, is that not the height of hypocrisy? Lethally so. Genocidally so. He was asking to be put back in his box, this chap Erdogan, but he said a lot more. He went on, he said, "I honestly don't know how someone can look in the mirror and support a resolution that doesn't condemn Hamas and doesn't even mention Hamas by name. But you know what? I have an idea." He then proceeded to put up a sheet of A4 with the actual phone number of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. Erdogan continued, "If you want a real ceasefire, here's the right address. This is the phone number of Hamas's office in Gaza. You can all call it and ask for Yahya Sinwar. Tell Hamas to put down their arms, turn themselves in and return our hostages. This will bring a complete ceasefire that will last forever. No piece of paper, especially one that is adopted by a biased, politicised majority, will prevent Israel from defending itself against those that seek our destruction. Israel is fighting a war for her future. There is not a single member state here that would act differently in a similar situation." Well, I would argue that most other member states aren't in a similar situation because they aren't all illegal occupiers for a start, but the occupied are the ones resisting. So how about you get out of Gaza, get out of the West Bank and get out of the Golan Heights and stop attacking people in their own lands? To publish a phone number, to go on such an unhinged rant, it was batshit stuff. It's no wonder more and more people are turning against Israel as time wears on. And so after several hours of debate, it came down to a vote on this resolution of a ceasefire, only symbolic alas once more, but it raises the stakes again from Article 99. It shows the Security Council the view of the whole of the UN. It is another escalation. It is more pressure to find a way. Those blocking the path to a ceasefire, i.e. the United States, will be feeling the heat again from their global counterparts over this, saying they want peace but blocking every route to it while supplying arms to Israel. Well, isn't a good look, is it? Most of the planet right now is justifiably condemning Biden and co. for their conduct. 153 countries voted for a ceasefire, 10 voted against, and 23 abstained. A similar vote held in October had some 30 fewer countries backing a ceasefire, so the mood music is definitely shifting against Israel. The 10 countries that deserve to be named and shamed, frankly, were Austria, Czechia, Guatemala, Israel, Liberia, Micronesia, Nauru, Papua New Guinea, Paraguay, and, of course, the United States. Several of those countries, notably the South Pacific nations, are reliant on the US for funding. Austria has a far-right leadership these days. These may not be big surprises, therefore, to everyone that they were against this, but they were in the minority. Notable abstainers, though, included Argentina, Germany, Italy, Ukraine of all places, and of course us here in the UK. We've shamed ourselves completely on this issue. But Germany, as I spoke about in another video recently, are apparently considering making Israeli support a condition of citizenship there, making their abstention a bit of a surprise. And Argentina have just elected a chainsaw-wielding right-wing extremist, making that abstention somewhat noteworthy as well. A 2/3 majority was required to pass. This was achieved easily, so it passed. It might not be legally binding, but it does heap more pressure on where it needs to be, and the US response afterwards did bear this out a little bit, with Biden being overheard to have said that Israel was starting to lose that support by the indiscriminate bombing that takes place. So they know, they admitted there, the bombing is indiscriminate then. I thought they were sticking to Israel's line that they are targeting Hamas. Of course, this isn't news to us. They've been targeting refugee camps and schools and hospitals. The convoys, the civilian casualty rate has been immense. And there is not 1 ounce of contrition from Israel over any of it. So there's not one speck of tolerance or patience for the genocide that is clearly taking place either. Biden has said Netanyahu has to change his government, but realistically he can't. He had to cobble together this horrible extremist lineup to take power as it was, and without them he can't hold it. So many Israelis themselves want Netanyahu gone, blame him rightly for all of this. Outside of power, the ICC might be more inclined to prosecute him. He's desperate to hold on to the reins of power. But it is way past time he was removed and never elected again. Biden can exert the influence to end this. Netanyahu's political career, though, now hangs, I think, on keeping this going. Most of the world won't tolerate that, so public opinion of both Israel and the US will continue to decline each day. A ceasefire doesn't happen. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where I went over the meaning of Resolution 377A and what the point of it is and how we arrived at the point we got to yesterday with this vote, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Labour resignations, they don't come much bigger than an MP resigning from the party, yet this is exactly what has just happened. Yet for a change has nothing to do with Keir Starmer's insistence that a ceasefire in Gaza won't save lives. Nick Brown is the former chief whip of the Labour Party, both under Jeremy Corbyn and Keir Starmer. In fact, he's been the chief whip for every Labour MP since Tony Blair. Last September he had the whip suspended, shortly after Starmer had shuffled him out of cabinet, apparently due to a complaint that had been made against him that was so serious it required the withdrawal of the whip, but was being kept so hush-hush that nobody to this day knows exactly why Brown had his party membership suspended, including Brown himself. Now he's sick and tired of this farce and has issued a damning letter saying just what he thinks of it all. Right, so Nick Brown, not many may know his name perhaps, but they'll know his face. So often seen occupying the end of the front bench in parliamentary exchanges as he has over the last several decades. He's been a Labour MP for as long as Jeremy Corbyn has, entering Parliament in 1983 as well. He's been Labour's chief whip for years, on and off since 1997, but having served in that role for every single Labour leader since Blair, bar none. However, that all came to an end in Keir Starmer's 2021 reshuffle, where Brown found himself consigned to the back benches. Now, having served under all of those leaders as the chief whip, from an actual socialist leader like Corbyn to red Tories like Blair and Starmer, Brown can only be considered a Labour loyalist. He's not factional, and it is that loyalty to the party, ironically, that many suspect was the reason Starmer binned him, because it was said by several Labour sources that Brown was trying to get Starmer to see sense over the matter of Jeremy Corbyn's suspension, the damage it was causing the party. But factionalism trumps common sense these days, honesty and decency too. So if that is true, well, it wouldn't surprise too many of us to see Brown sacked for putting party first by the reprobates running Labour now. Then came Brown's suspension last July, for which over a year and a half on we are still none the wiser as to what it is based on. Now, you can understand if things need to be kept confidential pending an investigation, but why, 18 months later, has no investigation still taking place? Nothing has happened. Brown has just been left hanging as an independent. If he's done something deplorable, it is all the more deplorable for the party to have just sat on that, surely. But by saying nothing, doing nothing, is this more factional abuse of the rules to suit Starmer's regime? We're left asking ourselves that question. Well, Brown has had enough, and via his solicitors Carter Ruck has issued it's a damning letter of resignation, in part due to his age, but in no small part due to the disciplinary process that isn't proceeding, and which he describes as being so fundamentally and inexcusably flawed that I can no longer engage with it. Brown's statement reads, "I am today announcing that I will not be standing again at the next general election. This is a decision which I have been pondering for some time. I am 73 years old and have had the honour of serving my constituents in Newcastle upon Tyne East for more than 40 years. during which time I have had the privilege of being the Labour Chief Whip under 4 party leaders, as well as in 4 ministerial posts. My constituency border is now being redrawn following the national constituency boundary changes, and I think it is a sensible time for me to retire, given that I would otherwise be nearly 80 by the end of my next term. However, it is also important to make clear that my decision to stand down is made against the backdrop of a long-running internal Labour Party disciplinary process against me, a process which I consider, and am advised, is so fundamentally and inexcusably flawed that I can no longer engage with it. As such, it is with an extremely heavy heart that, as well as announcing that I will not be standing for re-election, I have also today made the difficult decision to resign from my membership of the party which I love, and of which I have been a proud member for over 50 years. I wish to say something about the circumstances that have prompted me to take this step. I do so in part so that my own position is made clear, as I have not been able to say anything to date, resulting in speculation and gossip filling the vacuum. Also, I do so because the so-called investigation and then the disciplinary procedure to which I have been subjected is so grotesquely unfit for purpose and open to flagrant abuse by malicious complainants and political opponents alike that they risk causing a serious erosion of the confidence that the party's members should be able to place in it. By way of background, I have been suspended from the Labour Party since July of 2022. My suspension followed a complaint against me by a political rival within the party. It concerned an allegation about events said to have taken place more than 25 years ago. To be clear, the accusations against me were, and remain, entirely false, without even the faintest germ of any truth to them. Not only had they never previously been made in the ensuing 25 years, they had never been so much as hinted at, whether by that individual or anyone else. They came entirely out of the blue and as a complete bombshell to me. The person who made the accusations was a long-standing political opponent of mine, who at the time of the complaint clearly had political ambitions of their own, and I can only conclude that their decision to fabricate these allegations, hiding behind the safe cloak of a confidential process, was made with those ambitions in mind. It is striking, for example, that they declined to go to the proper authorities, which is what they should have done if there had been so much as a scintilla of truth in what they accused me of. There was, and is, no proper corroborative evidence to support the allegations. Indeed, I have been advised by leading counsel that much of the so-called evidence would be inadmissible in any disciplinary or legal process worthy of the name. When the complaint was first filed, I was determined to trust the Labour Party's investigation and disciplinary system. After all, as someone who had been a member of the party for so many years and had devoted much of my life to it, I wanted to trust the system. Furthermore, whilst I considered them to be plainly ludicrous, the allegations were very serious, and it was important they were looked at properly and with full rigour. Indeed, given the gravity of the allegations, I expected the party to approach the matter with the seriousness and legal rigour that the situation clearly demanded. This would include the procedural and evidential safeguards which such a situation required, for all involved. However, the opposite happened. Over the ensuing 17 months, it became clear to me and to my legal team that I can simply have no faith whatsoever in the ability, or I fear the desire, of the Labour Party to investigate and then adjudicate on this allegation fairly and even-handedly. On the contrary, the process has been structured and conducted in such a manner as to lack even the most basic of procedural fairness and evidential safeguards. Time and again, my lawyers and I have implored the party to properly adhere to those basic legal and common sense standards, yet time and again they have refused on the most flawed of grounds. Such are the blatant unfairness and procedural concerns which the party has brazenly dismissed, that the procedure has frequently and increasingly felt entirely skewed against me to the extent of being prejudged. Even if my concerns as to prejudgment are misplaced, and those involved with administering the process were acting in good faith and to the best of their abilities, the shortcomings are inexplicable and inexcusable. The litany of failings is too long to set out in the statement, but by way merely of illustration, despite this being an extremely serious case in which the demeanour and credibility of the complainant and I would be crucial, the party has refused my repeated requests that the proposed disciplinary hearing take place in person. Instead, it has insisted that the hearing takes place by video conference primarily, it seems for the convenience of those presiding over it. Equally extraordinarily, the party has refused even to permit the witnesses, including the complainant and I, to be questioned directly by the lawyers, instead restricting any questioning to be made through the panel of adjudicators, as they see appropriate. And aside from a wholly fabricated statement by the complainant made for the first time almost 25 years after the fabricated events are said to have taken place, the case against me relies largely on so-called evidence consisting of statements made by a small number of individuals friendly to the complainant, who admit that they knew nothing whatsoever of the allegation until the complainant chose to mention it to them more than 20 years later. Despite this, some within the party have effectively taken on the role of prosecutor, inviting the adjudicators to make findings of wrongdoing against me on the basis of this utterly flawed so-called evidence. I have repeatedly and clearly expressed my concerns about this procedure over many months reasonably and at great length. However, they have fallen on completely deaf ears to a degree which is simply terrifying for a major political party. As a consequence, and despite my hopes that good sense, legal propriety and basic natural justice might prevail, it has become increasingly clear to me not only that I cannot possibly expect a fair hearing, but that this process is a complete farce. It is for others to judge whether some within the party consider these flimsy allegations against me to be a convenient pretext for suspending me and then hounding me from the party. It has certainly felt that way, and even if that were not the intention, it is the appearance and effect. My own legal team, which includes a leading KC and a leading public law barrister, have told me that, in light of the party's refusal to comply with even the most basic of safeguards, evidential and procedural measures to be expected of any quasi-judicial process, they are unable to advise me that I could expect a fair hearing. Things have reached a very sorry pass when the likely next party of government conducts cases of this gravity in a manner more akin to those of a mismanaged golf club. I wish to thank the colleagues, friends and constituents who have stood by me throughout this process. It remains my hope that the country will soon be led by a strong Labour government, and one that probably adheres to the principles of fairness, accountability and due process. Well, if you want that last point, I would suggest that you need a Labour Party that's no longer led by Keir Starmer, Nick Brown. So Brown is under the impression that this is an allegation put forward by a political rival that occurred 25 years ago, and now all of a sudden it's led to a 1.5-year suspension going nowhere. I would wager Brown has done exactly as Starmer and co had hoped. I don't know what Brown may have been doing since he was sacked as chief whip, other than he has had a stint as chair of the finance committee. Could he have carried on calling for Corbyn's reinstatement in that time? He doesn't mention that. Could he have become overly critical of Starmer's regime? Well, he certainly has been very critical of it there. It just strikes me as frightfully convenient this complaint comes up now after all of this time, right after he had been calling for Corbyn to get the whip back, and then Starmer leaves him with his disciplinary process just completely stagnated. And of course Starmer, we remember, is a lawyer as well. Did he run the CPS like this? Does beg question, doesn't it? His complaints about the process and the advice given that it is completely unfit for purpose seem completely accurate. By walking, he may have done Starmer a favour. As I said, it means there's no awkward deselection and nomination of a new candidate for the seat of Newcastle upon Tyne East. Corbyn not planning on doing Starmer the same favour, certainly. But this whole sorry story and resignation just seems indicative of how far Starmer will go to rid himself of certain people, certain MPs, that have displeased him, that are working against him, that he's afraid of, perhaps. The weaponisation of the disciplinary process, which won't be news to any of the very many people who have been investigated by the governance and legal unit. Those sort of disciplinaries dealt with quickly enough, certainly, when Labour wants to purge ordinary members. But whether Brown will continue with any legal proceedings here is unclear. But it should be obvious to anyone by now that there is nothing either democratic or socialist about the Labour Party anymore. It's a regime, and there's no room for voices of dissent at all. And if you are dissenting, well, they'll find some way to get you out. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, there's a video recommendation where another Labour MP that is currently suspended, possibly pending his own eventual removal from the party, Andy MacDonald, has been suspended by the Labour Party over something that he never even said. Such is the ridiculousness of what the faction feel they can get away with. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so for so long the plan, if we can call it that, to solve the decades-long crisis between Israel and Palestine has been to allegedly work towards a two-state solution. I say allegedly because if progress on this were any slower, so many of the most powerful countries being decidedly one-sided in this matter, they would actually be going backwards on it. Actually, looking at the events of October 7th, that is exactly what has actually happened, isn't it? Reinforcing that point, though, Sky News once more wheeled out the utterly shameless and conscience-deficient Israeli ambassador to the UK, the hard-right, ultra-Zionist Zippy Hotovely, perpetually platformed by news channels by virtue of her position, yet with her known bias on this matter well documented, and her offensive views, but so emboldened by UK acquiescence to Israel that she had no problems at all dismissing the notion of a two-state solution entirely in just the worst way anybody possibly could. Now that stands in flagrant opposition to the UK's official position, which still backs that two-state solution, at least on paper. So should she not be being put back on a plane to Tel Aviv by now and told to never come back? Right, so Zippy Hotovely, the Israeli ambassador to the UK, featured in another of my videos just the other day, where she shamelessly pointed out to a tiny strip of land in Gaza, Al-Mawasi, basically a dirt beach treated as a junkyard, as a place where they could put 2.2 million displaced Gazans, where they could now live. Roughly a 20th of the size of the whole of the Gaza Strip, which in and of itself is already too small and one of the most densely populated areas on the planet. A brand new, far smaller open-air prison or concentration camp for them to live in, while Israel takes over the rest of Gaza, presumably, all the more easy for access to those gas fields that Israel have also just handed out drilling licenses for. Illegally, of course, because it isn't theirs. She's less an ambassador, less a liaison to build greater connections to the UK, as if our politicians aren't already kissing their backsides hard enough. She's more of an excuser for war crimes at this point. Nothing off the table, in my opinion. Well, Hotovely sat down for an interview with Sky News' Mark Austin at the Israeli embassy for a roughly about a 10-minute long interview. I won't go into all of it, though, but we might well come back to a few of her more vile comments in a moment. The crux of it in relation to this video came after questioning Hotovely as to how Israel will eliminate Hamas. It turned to what a post-Hamas Gaza would look like from Israel's perspective, leading into questioning on the two-state solution. So Mark Austin said to Hotovely, "So you eradicate Hamas. There's a question over whether you can do that. What happens post-Hamas in Gaza? What happens to 2 million people in Gaza? What do you think should happen?" Hotovely responded, "So I think the Israeli government's vision at the moment is in order to have a better future both to the Palestinians and to the Israelis. Gaza must be demilitarized and Gaza must be de-radicalized." Well, Austin came back in asking Hotovely whether this would still be under occupation, which winds me up actually. It's a normalization of the fact that Israel are in breach of international law and have been for decades. But then Hotovely's later responses spell this out as well. At any rate, at this point in the interview, she came back to that question with, "Obviously, we're not interested in governing the Palestinians, but we are interested in ensuring Gaza doesn't become another terror hub." It's an interesting statement. So she's saying there will be no governance from Israel once Hamas are gone, but neither will they help establish a new governance because they don't want to rule them. Bearing in mind Hamas are the elected government in Gaza right now. We've seen in so many other places where war has ended, and those who made the mess pack their bags and walk away, leaving the mess behind to sort itself out. Look at Afghanistan and look at Libya to see how well that goes. All that happens, especially if Gaza remains under occupation, is a new Hamas would surely just arise out of whoever is left. The occupied people would still want to resist that occupation. Austin drew Hotovely on that point, asking her who is left in Gaza, to which she answered, "We believe, together with our allies and moderate Arab countries, we can build a better future. But let me tell you my own insight. If education won't be addressed in Gaza, we will end up having another terrorist organisation with a different name." At least you admit to what will happen if you don't do anything once you've gotten rid of Hamas. You still haven't actually said what you're going to do. And anyway, Austin pushed her on what she meant by that, to which she came back with, "At the moment, under the UN name, the schools are becoming terror schools." Well, this is taking a darker turn. At this point, education by Israel in Gaza to stop them becoming terrorists again, because God forbid an occupied territory resists its occupation. What kind of education are we talking about here exactly? Well, Austin was thinking similarly, and he asked Hotovely what she meant. He brought this up in terms of the re-education that we associate with China, and things got decidedly darker still in response to that, not to mention quite insane. She said of this China comparison, "Absolutely not. This is what you did in Nazi Germany. This is what the British people did." You're not learning from your own history. In this residence that you came to, there is a Churchill painting. There is one thing we learned from Churchill's experience fighting Chamberlain's policy, is the fact that you cannot appease pure evil. So he knew that you could not negotiate with Hitler. We know we cannot negotiate with Hamas. And this means we need to have a better future for the Palestinians. Wow. So Hamas are Nazis now. Literal Nazis. The comparison drawn there. So last time I looked, Nazi Germany was bent on conquering Europe. Hamas are resisting occupation. I don't condone any acts of terrorism, but I don't blame Palestinians or Hamas, we shouldn't intentionally conflate the two, for wanting freedom from their overseers, for wanting their own nation. It's nuts. I wouldn't go extolling Churchill's virtues too hard either after what he pulled in Bengal. Anyway, at this point Austin thought he'd bring up the prospect, in light of Hotovelli's comments, the prospect of a two-state solution happening, in which case asking if there was still a chance for this. Well, this set her off. Hotovelli replied, I think it is about time for the world to realise that the Oslo paradigm failed on the 7th of October and we need to build a new one. Austin cut her off here. For the most part, in this 10-minute long-ish interview, he just let Hotovelli say her piece throughout the questioning. But now he pressed her, asking, does this include the Palestinians living in a state of their own? You would think he'd set fire to Hotovelli's chair with her sat in it. She was incredulous at the prospect. How dare someone say it out loud within her presence? She shot back with, the answer is absolutely no, and I'll tell you why. Israel knows today, and the world should know now. The reason the Oslo Accords failed is because the Palestinians never wanted to have a state next to Israel. They want to have a state from the river to the sea. Oh, that phrase again being abused. Austin then put to her, so the two-state solution is dead then? To which Hotovelli, getting still more incensed, barked back, why are you obsessed with a formula that has never worked, that created this radical people on the other side? Why are you obsessed with it? It isn't an obsession for an occupied people to have their occupation ended and to have a state of their own. Their lands were taken from them ahead of Israel declaring its existence and independence in 1948, in no small part to Western nations like our own. In the 1967 war, Israel seized yet more Palestinian land and placed them under occupation, which drove in no small way the formation of Hamas in the 80s, not to mention their attacks on other neighbouring states like Syria, taking the Golan Heights, and Lebanon, which saw the formation of Hezbollah. Hotovelli brought up the Oslo Accords. That was an agreement signed in 1993 by then Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and the leader of the PLO Yasser Arafat, which involved the withdrawal of Israeli armed forces from Palestinian territory. It started well, and then Netanyahu came to power, and all of the areas Israel had withdrawn from, they just retook. The reason those accords failed is your own Prime Minister and the governance that he's ushered in over the last 20-odd years, Hotovelli, and you damn well know it. I'll also draw attention to her bringing up the notion that Palestinians and Hamas are evil in the same vein as Nazi Germany. How much footage do we need to see that we'll never be able to unsee coming out of Gaza that reminds us of those times, but not being committed by Hamas, but by the IDF, acts of evil, setting fire to toys and food and other humanitarian aid. It's caught on camera. We've seen it. Camera doesn't lie. Bombing hospitals, bombing schools, which even the US are now calling indiscriminate. The recent example, easily one of the worst events of this entire recent saga over the last couple of months, that has come out of the Jabalia refugee camp, where a school building was found with the bodies of men, women and children having been killed apparently in an execution style, with even newborns apparently riddled with bullets. And Hotovelli sits there and defends this, comparing Israeli actions with that of Churchill during World War II, acting like Israel are heroes here. Hotovelli earlier in the interview praised the US and the UK for their support for Israel in opposing a ceasefire. They're great allies. She made special mention of the fact that never before in the UK have there been so many political leaders on their side. This interview was absolutely nauseous. Hotovelli should be expelled for what she said. She would instead be completely supported by government and opposition alike. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content up daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where the disgraceful Hottabelly was trying to sell that Almoassi strip of land as a viable option, home for 2.2 million people in a splat of land about half the size of West Cornwall. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so get your tickets for this weekend, folks. The time, the place. It's karaoke time. I can only assume it's karaoke where you have to sing through your nose, although singing might just be a little bit exciting for the Brill Cream de Beige one. Perhaps you have to instead take turns reading out your favourite Starmer speeches to entertain the masses, and by masses I mean just a half dozen hardcore Starmer stans that can afford the price of a ticket. 90% of those speeches will of course be ruled out too, since Starmer has long contradicted them all by now. I'm sure it will be a riveting event. But in all seriousness though, Starmer is heading to Croydon to launch a fundraiser, begging the question, where has all the money from these red Tory donors of yours gone, if you're holding your hand out yet again? Right, so the begging bowl is being passed around by Team Keith again, apparently, because the party is allegedly doomed without your donations. They can't survive without your hard-earned cash. They just can't keep up with copying the Tories all the time if you don't pay up. This is all despite the big business corporate types and those billionaires we've all heard about returning to the Labour fold. Now they're all nice and safe and Tory lights again, working for them and not for us. Yet it is us that Starmer's lot think are stupid enough to pay out for them to presumably waste more cash. What are you doing with all this money? And why Croydon anyway? Well, I suppose people from Croydon might argue, well, why not Croydon? But also because I'm minded to remember just how corrupt the Labour Party in Croydon has become there, being the stomping ground of Keir Starmer's sidekick, David Evans, the General Secretary of Labour, not to mention the home of every Labour member's favourite online voting tool, a non-voter, which is delivering the goods for Team Keith, if not for democracy, and is facing investigation for vote fraud as a result of that. An investigation that has now spread from Croydon and is now affecting selections for the Greater London Assembly, since one of the non-voter's owners is standing for Labour at the GLA. You can look at Croydon and figure it, well, this might well be fairly safe ground for Keithites in which case. However, last month it should be noted that a fundraiser, another attempted fundraiser for Starmerite MP Steve Reid, the local MP, held by Croydon Labour again at the Grand Sapphire Hotel off the Purley Way, where 200 people have bought tickets at £45 a pop, had to be abandoned when protesters turned up, protesting the party's stance on Gaza and Israel and their opposition to a ceasefire. Protests notable for coming from the local imams and the Muslim communities there. So it's possibly a braver decision than first glance to return to Croydon once again, to head to Croydon again, though it tells me their options perhaps are very, very limited as to who will host them in London, given their stance on that ceasefire has not just changed, just the venue. According to Eventbrite, it being now Ruskin House on Coombe Road in Croydon this Saturday night. It would be a rotten shame if people turned up and protested again. It'll round off a day of protest for many, as while Labour is planning a donations event for themselves, much of London, being a Saturday, will once more be marching for Palestine. Days of action happening up and down the country as Israel continues to fail to be held to account. So how much is a ticket this time then, Damo? Given you £45 a pop last time. Well, it's definitely still an event for the few and not the many, as general admission is £22.38 a head, including the admin fee for Eventbrite. But you can get a concession ticket, though gives no idea as to what actually counts as a concession, for £16.36. Of course, socialism is always for the few and not the many in Starmer's Labour as well. It's a swear word unless it is convenient for him. So even if you can't attend, you can still buy a, solidarity ticket, which is literally just a flaming party donation, for heaven's sake, for the same price as the concession. Well, this is all called hell up by those based in Ruskin House, because it isn't just a social club to hold such events as this, but it also contains several offices, not least of which for the Morning Star newspaper, along with several local trade union branches and even a rival political party. The Communist Party of Britain is based there. Historically, it has been a centre of political progressivism, so Starmer taking the party backwards 30 years should mean he catches fire the minute he passes the threshold, or it should. But that talk of possible protest earlier, well, of course there's a protest planned. Why would there not be? Of course there is. It's Keith. It is already being boycotted by many local members and people disgusted by Starmer's anti-ceasefire stance and his advocacy for Israel to be allowed to commit war crimes, which people are not forgetting in a hurry. One boycotter said, "Ordinary people of Croydon are disgusted by Keir Starmer, who believes that Israel has the right to deprive the already impoverished and besieged Gazans of food, fuel and water, and by local MP Steve Reid's refusal to call for a ceasefire and his refusal to listen to the concerns of his constituents on this matter." The event has been called tastelessly named, the entire party revolving around the hopeless leader, even to the point his name has got to be shoehorned into certain events badly. Though given the crassness Croydon Labour are known for, not my words incidentally, but the words of local paper Inside Croydon, they are cautioning people about sharing details of this event on social media. Well, I can't imagine why that would be. Oh well, it's a shame I've done it then, eh? Be an even bigger pity if more people shared that information as well, wouldn't it? Here's a few more comments from disgruntled local activists and pro-Palestine supporters. While Reid, Starmer and the Labour Party leadership drags its feet on properly condemning the barbaric war crimes committed by Israeli armed forces in Gaza, surely Croydon Labour should have its event boycotted, picketed again. WhatsApp messages from Labour Party loyalists have been seen which look forward to partying at Ruskin House on Saturday. Which one of the event's organisers making a joke that they want to be Croydon's answer to Jane McDonald, whoever that is? Ruskin House should cancel the booking or they will be condemned for allowing their venue to be used by an organisation that is giving political support genocide. The communities of Croydon should mobilise to demonstrate their disapproval of this tasteless karaoke event that glorifies a supporter and apologist for genocide. They're right, of course. It is the height of poor taste, while thousands of people will be marching in London once again for the people of Gaza. Starmer and his hangers-on will be strangling a cat, metaphorically speaking, into a microphone. People who oppose everything, much of London and the rest of the country too, will be marching for that day. He wants to represent us without actually giving a damn about what we actually want or care about. Every time he opens his mouth and says he wants to serve us, it is a lie, because he couldn't care less about ordinary lives here, our lives, our wishes, our wants, our desires, any more than he cares about ordinary lives in Gaza. He can't possibly. You can't switch empathy on and off. You either have it or you don't. And nothing about Keir Starmer tells me he's in possession of it. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where I covered that Croydon vote fraud story. Still an ongoing matter. Telling you all about Croydon Labour. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so as our headlines remain dominated by world events and the Tories being evil and incompetent, paving the way for the establishment-favoured Keir Starmer, Starmer is certainly proving not to be favoured by not just many of us ordinary members of the public, and not just ordinary members of the Labour Party either, but elected representatives of the Labour Party too, as an unheard of fourth council loss in as many months outside of local elections has just happened. And this time it might not be entirely to do with Starmer's ongoing refusal to back a ceasefire to end the killing in Gaza, because there have been issues in Hastings over the last year or so already with interference from the top of the party, and the statement issued by the Labour leavers themselves implies that things might finally have boiled over there. Right, so for all the mainstream news outlets and polls that are singing the story of a Labour lead, a Labour landslide on the horizon, the party of government in waiting possibly, behind the scenes, Labour is continuing to crack up. A fourth council is now no longer Labour run, and it is not altogether clear how they'll move forward from here there either. 6 councillors have resigned the Labour whip, and although one has very much issued a statement in relation to Starmer's position on Gaza, the problems and tensions in Hastings have been rumbling on for quite a while. You see, Hastings Borough Council last held its local elections in spring of 2022, and it's a 32-seat council, and Labour in 2022 won 15 of the seats, so it was just shy of majority control, which it had held before. And the reason it had lost control was the Green Party, who had increased their representation on the council then from 3 to 5 councillors. So in order to put together an administration, the Labour group went into coalition, went into a cooperative with the Greens, giving them a working majority of 20. The other seats on the council, incidentally, are held by 11 Tories and 1 Reform UK councillor, themselves formerly a Tory, who apparently got kicked out by the Tories. Goodness knows why. You therefore had on the face of it a progressive administration here. Labour and the Greens, heavily influenced by the Greens, needing Green votes to get stuff through. Certainly the alternative appears to have been far worse. Who could possibly have a problem with that? Cue Keir Starmer and his sidekick, the General Secretary David Evans, who, as a pair of red Tories, well, very definitely had a problem with this, along with the leadership that they run. Things have been working perfectly well with Labour and the Greens running things up until October of 2022, when Starmer and Evans, or whoever they had put in charge of this little incident operation, certainly the Labour leadership somewhere along the lines, decided to interfere. Now, as part of the coalition between Labour and the Greens in Hastings, two of the Green councillors were portfolio holders. But the diktat then came down the line, with the Labour council leader Paul Barnett apparently being threatened with expulsion if the two Green councillors as part of this cooperative were not replaced. Therefore, the cooperative that had been working up until then had to be dissolved. With 15 seats, Labour was left short of overall control, a situation that was resolved, and evidently the Labour leadership up the line were much happier with this, by going into a cooperative arrangement with the single Reform UK councillor, the Labour mayor's casting vote to get their agenda pushed through. Labour made itself, therefore, completely beholden to Reform UK in Hastings, having to keep their vote to get anything through, all because of interference from up the line. I can only imagine how disgusted some of these Labour councillors, having had a working majority, flexibility with it to an extent, a progressive approach to local politics thanks to the Green influence, and I would hope decent socialist Labour representatives too, completely run roughshod over by the red Tory team that took over from the Corbyn administration, and for whom working with Reform UK, the too right-wing even for the Tories party, the party which is really a private company owned solely by Richard Tice, and for whom Tice and other leaders in the party all work for Rupert Murdoch's Talk TV. Just who exactly is in charge of that bunch? You, of course, try to make it work for the benefit of your constituents, don't you? This is the hand you've now been delivered, thanks to your bosses up the line, to serve them and the community to meet their needs. You try. But at no point did Starmer and co give a stuff about that, clearly. They just didn't want to see Labour working with the Greens, presumably because they'd lost seats to them. Well, that's democracy. Suck it up, Buttercup. Any chance of progressive politics died a death the moment a Reform UK councillor, singular, was put in a position by the Labour leadership, in effect, to be able to call all the shots, or they won't be able to pass anything. Therefore, I can totally see this situation having boiled over to the point 6 Labour councillors have now quit the party, forming a new independent group, Hastings Independents, and quite literally throwing control of the council now wide open. Among the 6 councillors to quit is the council leader himself, who was apparently threatened with expulsion, Paul Barnett, the deputy council leader as well, Maya Evans, and 4 others. Their press release, which is brief, reads, "After long and careful consideration, we have made the difficult decision today to leave the Labour Party and become independent councillors. There are many reasons, but our view is that standing up for Hastings and our residents will be much easier as independents. The National Labour Party no longer provides us with the policies, the support, or the focus on local government that we need, given the issues we are committed to tackling. We will now concentrate on standing up for Hastings, to work in partnership with all those who are passionate to drive our town forward and our work in our communities, which is why we all became councillors. As a group, we will not be making any further comment until the new year. Signed, Councillors Paul Barnett, Maya Evans, Andy Batsford, John Cannon, Ali Rourke and Simon Willis." It does very much sound like these councillors have found themselves tied to having to vote a certain way and not how they wanted to best meet the needs of their constituents, hence why they now say it will be easier for them as independents to represent their residents. And that, to me, does sound like they've been sick of effectively having to take direction from entities that they didn't desire to, such as Reform UK, at the demand of a leadership they don't agree with, as the criticism of the National Party shows there. Totally correctly, in my view, I agree wholeheartedly with that sentiment, to the surprise of absolutely nobody watching this video, I'm sure. Councillor Maya Evans herself issued her own statement as well, despite the group saying they wouldn't be collectively commenting further until the new year. She really went for it. I think this bears out much of what I've already covered here. I won't cover the whole statement, certainly. It's much longer than the group statement. But here's part of it. Over the past few years, it has become increasingly apparent that the Labour Party has moved away from its core values and principles. To woo the Tory vote over the Labour vote, the Labour Party has lost its way, leaning into right-wing policies and rhetoric which has become increasingly difficult to publicly justify and support. Locally, we have been micromanaged by Westminster-centric, unelected Labour Party officials who have barely visited Hastings, let alone understand the town and its residents. The National Party has denied Hastings members the right to select their own parliamentary candidate and selection of councillors. And there is now a well-established national pattern of the Labour Party blocking people of colour from leadership positions. It appears unelected Labour officials have a very fixed idea around who is electable. Sadly, this tends not to favour people of colour, working class people, or local people from the community. I have personally been blocked by the Labour Party from standing as an MP and also to restand as a councillor. The reasons given were spurious. Labour's policy position on Gaza has been completely unforgivable, from not supporting a ceasefire to silencing politicians from speaking out, expelling an MP, unofficially instructing councillors not to attend peace marches, and enforcing a 3-line whip which led to the resignations of 10 shadow ministers. To date, 18,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, 7,000 of which were children. To stay silent is to not support humanity. I think she's hit several nails on the head there. Several reasons, particularly that perhaps the Hastings Independent don't want to collectively speak on at this point, but may well come on to later. She did allude to there being a number of issues, as did the collective statement. A genocide-supporting racist party, no longer on the side of ordinary working-class people, that discriminates against anybody they deem problematic, particularly people of colour as well, and will find reasons to deal with such people so as to remove them from being a problem. The purge of members has been the dominant story. We know how that feels if we've been on the left of the party and we've been facing that kind of a treatment from them. But the purge of decent representatives is another side to this story entirely, one that has not been well publicised, and if anything has been even more vicious. So where does this leave Hastings Borough's Council now then, Damo? Well, Labour are reduced to 9 councillors. They have no chance of forming a majority administration at all. The Tories are now the largest party with 11 councillors. I can't see anyone going into a cooperative with them. So the Labour Party's own actions, their own drive towards Blairism, Tory-lightism, has effectively crippled this council. The Tories can try and form a minority administration, so could Labour. They'll both find it incredibly hard to pass anything that isn't progressive, though. So perhaps in doing this, the Hastings Independents have actually forced their former party's hand, no longer being able to rely on the bidding of, or doing the bidding of, perhaps a Reform UK, but having to win independent and Green votes now on a case-by-case basis to get anything passed. Well, we shall see what happens, won't we? I'll be very interested in what they have to say in the new year, though, of course. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily as ever. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation covering the collapse of the Labour Party's control of Norwich City Council, the last administration it lost control over. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so the disability minister brief has been binned by Rishi Sunak because the Tory war on woke now apparently requires a minister and there's no room for both. Who better to appoint to said new role than an MP already responsible for dumbing down people on a regular basis, daft enough to watch your show on GBBs with her equally unpleasant Tory MP husband, the shame of Shipley Philip Davies, than Esther McVeigh, better known to people subject to the whims of the Department for Work and Pensions as Fester McVile, and for very good reason. So deeply unpleasant was she in that role that she ended up losing her seat in 2015, before being handed George Osborne's safe seat when he left Parliament in 2017, hence the reason we're stuck with her again. Of course, her official title role is Minister without Portfolio, but even the mainstream press haven't shied away from spelling out exactly what she's there to do, referring to her as the common sense czar. Well, that'll be the day. But to tell disabled people around the country that you don't matter, as this move does, downgrading the role, and in Disability History Month at that, just underlines how little the unelected economic obsessive Sunak cares for those with disabilities. Right, so I've done a number of videos recently concerning disability issues, long-term sick and disabled people. I'm an unpaid carer. This is an issue I very much take to heart. I take it personally. After 13 years of being abused to the point thousands have lost their lives, how can people like us, families like mine, not take it personally? How can you not be incensed by what has happened? And I take very little nonsense from people who bleat about people like that being shirkers or skivers, because anyone can have a life-changing event happen to them tomorrow, and the reality of the state of disability aid and care and how such people and their carers are treated by society and considered by government, well, it'll be a very big eye-opener to some who really need their eyes opened, won't it? But seriously, no matter what doubts you might have about how genuine you think some people are, surely you can understand the importance of the government of the day having a minister for disabled people. It's hard enough getting representation amongst MPs of disabled people. There are very few disabled MPs, there's a handful. People who truly understand what day-to-day life is like for their disabled constituents, without removing the role entirely, only to downgrade it and lump it in with the health and work remit, because all that shows is a desire by this Tory government, completely in line with the reforms Jeremy Hunt announced in the autumn statement, reforms, to get people working again, or else get them off their benefits if they can possibly manage it. It's what they've been doing for 13 years. It has been killing people, and it's got to stop. Compassion and common sense and an appreciation that they can't all work, or jobs they can do don't necessarily exist or pay well enough to live on. Also, without a minister dedicated to disabled people's interests, the ability of disabled people to help shape and have a say on disability policy is impacted upon too, as if it's not hard enough already. Bear in mind, 24% of this country are actually registered as long-term sick or disabled, according to the charity Scope. That's 16 million people that are being told they don't matter by the Tories. That's a lot of voters potentially, if nothing else. There are all manner of complications associated with this, and I'm not saying they shouldn't be approached and overcome, or attempted to. That would be a good thing. But I am saying this bunch of Tory shysters are not doing that, nor have they ever done, and they certainly don't have any intention of doing. They clearly think it's a vote winner to just dismiss the disabled as less important, and equality's demographic as they are. And if that is winning your vote, then I completely despise you. Because it might be them today, but they'll come for you next. Underlining the tin-earedness of the move, though, is the fact Sunak has chosen to do this during Disability History Month of all times, which I doubt he's even aware of. It runs from the 16th of November to the 16th of December, and this came into being in 2010, coincidentally, along with the Conservatives' return to power. And little wonder it has grown to more and more prominence in that time, and as a theme each year. This year's theme having been disability, childhood and youth, and therefore the work involved has, as their website states, provides an opportunity for all councils, service providers, education establishments, youth, play and sports organisations, health providers and employers to examine their approaches to disabled children and youth. Those in the media, publishing and image making can challenge the way they have portrayed disabled people in the past and instead begin to create inclusive and non-stereotypical ways forward in conjunction with disabled young people. From a history of neglect, harsh punishment, segregation, bullying and ignorance, we must learn to challenge our prejudices and discriminatory practices. The way disabled children and young people have been and are treated is an indicator of how inclusive and rights-respecting we are as a community and society. Impairment is a natural part of human existence, but societal responses have varied across cultures and time. Disabled people, including children, have often been falsely blamed and scapegoated for society's ills. If one grows up on the receiving end of negativity, then one often internalises that negativity. Most important in bringing about positive change is how we think about impairment and disablement. It wouldn't have done the government any harm to have just read that and had a long, hard think about what they're doing, but that of course implies that they give a damn, which of course they do not. As the old Niemöller poem goes, first they came for the disabled. Of course, promoting ignorance, the very opposite of Disability History Month, is also what the Tories do want, hence the brief being handed to Esther McVey. Wokeism is the enemy of the Tory, you see, but anyone attacking the concept of being woke is by definition being pro-ignorance. McVey being called the common sense czar is frankly hilarious given her gaffe-prone track record, because this is somebody who referred to pandemic lockdowns as communist, who attacked the disabled and sought to strip them of their money while calling claims about those cuts fake news. She herself, though, was happy to blow $8,000 on a photographer for herself when she had leadership ambitions. While she was trying to fast-track universal credit too fast, causing problems, she decided instead of taking responsibility for that to blame the National Audit Office instead. But they pulled her up on it and she was forced to grovel to the Commons and apologise. She's called food banks a good and decent thing and that it is right more people are using them. She's determined sanctions help people back into work and she's praised the bedroom tax. She attacked poor people who can't eat for having phones despite the department she was head of, notably universal credit claimants, needing phones to get the financial support they were claiming. Frankly, there is no wonder this woman lost her seat in 2015, and it really does show how talentless the Tories are that they handed her a safe seat, desperate as they were, to get her back into Parliament. Gone are the days where the Tories could get away with this sort of crap, get away with whatever they liked, and the mainstream media covering for them, because we can find alternatives to them now, can't we? Those pesky independent outlets, how dare they counter our lies? And as more and more people wake up to the fact these papers have been dumbing them down for years, as their circulations fall, as more and more of us become critical of the likes of the BBC as well, the stranglehold of successive governments and their friends in the press had over what we got fed under the pretense of being news gets loosened more and more. It is so important that that continues, that we no longer have a billionaire-controlled press, but keep working towards a free and fearless one instead, telling us what we need to know rather than just what they want us to know. At the end of the day, though, this move tells us nothing new. The Tories have always hated the disabled, and they will carry on hating the disabled. Sunak is just inept enough to dot the I's and cross the T's on the matter. If you're disabled, you can't afford to vote Tory. That's just a fact. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where the DWP is now so understaffed and underfunded, it's now verging on collapse. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Piers Morgan is what the media are fixating on in the wake of Prince Harry's successful litigation, not against Morgan, but against the entire Mirror Group newspapers, which includes the Mirror, the Sunday Mirror and the People, winning 15 of the 33 claims against them that he brought in relation to phone hacking. Now, of course, where Piers Morgan is concerned, he has denied ever doing it or ever knowing anything about it, claiming his hands are being completely squeaky clean in the 9 years that he was the newspaper editor of the Mirror, despite the fact he is mentioned by name 83 times in the 386-page High Court judgment. But this goes beyond just Piers Morgan, even despite the prominence in which he is mentioned, because once again it has thrust the fact our media are still allowed to mark their own homework, even after the original phone hacking scandal that brought down the news of the world took place. We need to revisit the Leveson inquiry. We need to examine how the media got away and continue to get away with not being legislated over, and they cannot accept the fact that they can't be trusted to regulate themselves, because they simply can't be. Right, so the judgment has been handed down by High Court Justice Timothy Fancourt in the case between Prince Harry and 3 others versus Mirror Group newspapers over allegations of phone hacking, and of the 33 instances brought by the Prince, 15 have been upheld. Functionally, it means it is impossible for the Mirror Group's executives of the day, which at that time included Piers Morgan, as editor of the Mirror, to have not been aware. And Morgan has always vociferously denied any knowledge of phone hacking, of course, or being aware of it ever going on, despite having been the editor at the time of Harry's allegations, being the editor of the Mirror between 1995 and 2004. As the Prince's barrister David Sherborne said as part of a statement on behalf of his client, the court ruled that unlawful and criminal activities were carried out at all 3 Mirror Group newspaper titles, the Mirror, the Sunday Mirror and the People, on a habitual and widespread basis for over more than a decade. Morgan has threatened legal action on anyone, of course, saying he was ever involved. He's done it numerous times, not least of which on TV on his own show, or that he knew anything about what was going on. But the judgment is that he must have known, and searching his name in the 386-page judgment, what has been said in court comes up with 83 mentions of Morgan. Some notable examples from the judgment are implicating him in some form of wrongdoing, and a few examples are: phone hacking was rife at the Daily Mirror by 1999, but not so evident in April 1998. Mr. Hipwell's evidence that Mr. Morgan, editor of the Daily Mirror, knew about and took the benefit of the practice was convincing. Another example involved a conversation between Morgan and then Director of Communications at 10 Downing Street between 2000 and 2005. So under Tony Blair, involving the hacking of the phones of then England football manager Sven-Göran Eriksson and Ulrika Jonsson. He attended the Labour Party conference in Blackpool in September 2002 and remembers going out for a Chinese meal with Mr. Morgan present. He asked Mr. Morgan how the Mirror had obtained the story about Mr. Eriksson and Ms. Johnson. He said Mr. Morgan responded by asking which network provider he used for his mobile phone and then what the default PIN code was for that network. He said that default numbers were rarely changed and that was how phone messages could be accessed remotely. Mr. Veg-Prosser said that Mr. Morgan then said that was how we got the story on Sven and Ulrika, or words to that effect with a smile. The evidence was not challenged by Mirror Group Network and speaks for itself. David Seymour, who was group political editor of the Daily Mirror from 1993 to 2007, gave evidence about his dealings with Mr. Morgan. He said that he witnessed him at close quarters and had a close working relationship with him. He came to learn about some of the dubious methods being used to get stories in the Mirror. He said that he regarded Mr. Morgan as unreliable and boastful and apt to tell untruths when it suited him. Mr. Seymour said that on one occasion in 1996, Mr. Morgan showed him a video of a pack of paparazzi pursuing Princess Diana in the street and causing her distress by harassment, which belied a recently published article that suggested that the princess was distressed upon leaving the building of a therapist. He recalls Mr. Morgan saying, "If this gets out, we are finished." On another occasion, Mr. Seymour said that he was walking through the newsroom, probably in March 2001, and Mr. Morgan was standing in the middle holding a tape machine with reporters around him. He said, "Listen to this," and played a recording of Paul McCartney, who was singing a Beatles song, to Heather Mills in a voicemail left for her. Mr. Seymour said that he later learnt that the recording had been made or acquired by Neil Wallace, who had lent it to Mr. Morgan. The term "I think he doth protest too much" very much seems to apply to Piers Morgan here. The claims made, highlighted in the judgment, bear out the opinion that even if he was not directly involved in any form of phone hacking, Morgan clearly knew what was going on and seemingly revelled in it. Piers Morgan being distasteful and dislikable and having done things many already surmised he'd done or been aware of, despite his aggressive denials, isn't really news as such, though. Of course people are lapping it up. Of course the mainstream media are all over this angle to this story. But they're all missing the point, and very deliberately so, because if they told us what we all ought to be thinking about, they'd squeal witch hunt at us again. Because, again, we're being reminded that all of our mainstream media, with its inbuilt biases towards the wishes of their billionaire owners, is neither trustworthy nor truly informative on the things that matter, and actions to get stories such as we've seen here can't go untouched again, not acted upon. The days of the press regulating itself have got to end. The Leveson inquiry spelt out in no uncertain terms the failures of the press in the wake of the phone hacking scandal of the News of the World back in 2011, triggering then Prime Minister David Cameron to open the first part of the Leveson inquiry to investigate press standards in the wake of that phone hacking scandal. But he closed it a year later in 2012, and nothing functionally changed, because the Tories clearly saw the risk to themselves if their loyal media ended up with their hands being tied. Despite Leveson finding gross shortcomings, obvious shortcomings frankly, when the press had no oversight with any teeth and could act with impunity, and the fact Leveson was never actually implemented was one of the biggest travesties of political and journalistic failure in this country this century. The Tories then stood on a manifesto commitment to not push ahead with the second part of Leveson at all. Yes, you might be surprised to hear they only ever did half the job anyway, when the connection between the police and the press were due to be investigated, and how information might get leaked from the police to journalists. That's never happened, and it still has to. It really must do. The one silver lining to come from all of this failure to implement Leveson, though, was the fact that any media outlet and journalist worth their salt volunteered to sign up to Leveson levels of increased scrutiny, choosing to subject themselves to that so as to be reputably better than those who are not. And funnily enough, there is not one single mainstream major media outlet who has chosen to subscribe to that in what became the Impress press regulator. They stuck with good old marking their own homework ipso instead. You only need visit the Impress website to see the list of titles signed up to better levels of scrutinies. Examples including Squawkbox, Novara Media, Declassified UK, Bywire News, and more. 127 outlets, almost exclusively independent media as they are, publishing some 212 publications between them. The biggest story here is that what has happened with the Mirror here and now is exactly what happened to the News of the World over 10 years ago, which means the effects of it are still being felt. The damage is still getting dealt with from that. And the only thing not actually getting dealt with is how all of this was allowed to happen to begin with, which is with the media being put under more scrutiny, with the need for them to be subjected to more checks and balances to ensure that these things cannot ever be repeated, because as things stand, they can. And it seems a pretty safe bet to assume that they will. Piers Morgan, all the talk of Piers Morgan, is the distraction covering up the fact that this is the actual problem that needs to be dealt with, and that it still hasn't been dealt with, that there still is no intention to deal with it because no one is talking about it again. And Piers Morgan basically just exemplifies that. We need to have this debate again now, before we're talking about the next phone hacking scandal or the technological equivalent in a few years' time. Part 2 of Leveson should absolutely go ahead, and the findings of Part 1 need putting into law, not just something to be opted into by media who want to have some sort of reputable reputation of their own. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Piers Morgan got roasted on air by Green Party co-leader Carla Denyer over Palestine after he tried to talk her down on the subject. And, well, he was made to wish that he hadn't. Couldn't happen to a nicer fella, really. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.